Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Canadian Immigration Podcast. This is episode 142, and it's entitled From Temporary to Tenuous, the PNP Battle for Permanent Residence. A cutesy little title, which basically means any foreign worker here in Canada, they're starting to see that the options, whether it's PNP or the federal programs, are really in doubt. Alicia, how are you doing? Welcome back to another episode here as my faithful co-pilot.
I'm doing well, Mark, and it was really good. Igor and I were able to go to the National Immigration CBA conference that was in Montreal, and so this was a theme that was coming up. I was able to moderate the panel on express entry, and we talked a lot about what is happening with CRS scores federally and how that is now putting intense pressure on the provinces in their PNP programs. And we're starting to see even earlier this year that the PNPs are oversubscribed. They don't have more allocations overall for federal, how many nominations they will have. And so people are starting to really have limited options in terms of whether PNP will be a pathway to permanent residence for them.
Let's start for some maybe that are just tuning in and are unfamiliar with what's been going on. Can you give a little bit of a breakdown as to what this whole PNP thing is compared to the regular immigration economic programs at the federal level?
Mm-hmm. And so we've got lots of provinces and we've got lots of different programs within each province. But by and large, most provinces have an express entry linked stream, meaning that you have to already qualify for minimum eligibility for either CEC or federal skilled worker, or maybe federal skilled trades. And then you have to also do a separate application step through the province in order to get, sometimes there's a notification of interest section where you can't even apply unless they invite you to apply. Sometimes there are direct apply possibilities, but it's a multiple stage process where you've got to generally qualify for express entry federally, put another application into the province, and then hope that the province nominates you. And of course, if the province nominates you on an express entry linked, you're getting 600 points. You've basically won the express entry lottery. And now when there's another federal draw, you get that invitation to apply, that golden ticket. There are also provincial nominee streams in the various provinces that are not express entry linked, but those ones are very targeted, and they normally are required to have a employer job offer within that province. Those employers normally have to be vetted by the province. People have to have certain language scores. They have to usually have been working in that province for a year or have a significant tie and a family member to the province. So what I would really like to dispel today, Mark, is the desperation where sometimes we might have bad actors who are selling a story, right? They're selling a song to people saying, oh, I'll just hire me and I will help you get a PNP nomination. And I would really like people to know it is definitely not that easy.
No, not at all. And one thing when it comes to these PNPs, it's important to understand that the focus is really to tie individuals to labor market shortages in the provinces. And one of the pillars of all of the provincial nominee programs is being able to demonstrate that you can economically establish yourself in those provinces. So people, and we've talked about this for a number of years, when they're not, and we'll cover this a little bit later, but essentially when they don't see options in one province or they don't see options federally, then we've advised people, look, you need to consider moving. And if you move to a province, maybe that isn't as competitive, like for example, the OINP in Ontario or the BC PNP, which historically have been extremely competitive. When you think about the fact that statistics show almost or over 50% of international students have gone to Ontario, there just simply isn't room for all of them to go through. So in the many consultations we've had over the years, I've advised people, look, you should consider going to Atlantic Canada or going to a different province, go to Manitoba. Well, that solution is no longer what it used to be. Why? Because once again, the numbers are just far outstripping the spots that are available for permanent residents. So that leads us, Alicia, now to a discussion about a new measure that the federal government has entered into to support skilled temporary workers in Manitoba. And I'll just shift our little screen over here so those who are watching on YouTube can see. this measure, which was just released about a week ago, May 8th, maybe you can just talk briefly about this, Alicia, for the listeners.
Yeah, so it was really good to go to the conference because we were able to talk to lawyers across the country who understand what's going on in their jurisdictions. And so what we heard from Manitoba was that people have been starting to cotton on to what is going on in Manitoba. And so they have been putting in Manitoba expression of interests into the pool in Manitoba for some time, which has started to make those processing times in Manitoba creep higher and higher and higher. So that processing now is over a year for the Manitoba PNP. And what that has done, of course, is mean that people are running out of their work permit status. People who were on an open work permit, on a postgrad work permit, are now starting to come to the end of their postgrad work permit. Employers are scrambling to try to find LMIAs, which is always a difficult thing. And so there started to be demonstrations in Manitoba at the legislative buildings to say there needs to be some solution for all these people who've been working for employers within the province for such a long time. And we know, of course, that Minister Miller did meet with all of the provincial counterparts in immigration and the ministers to talk about what was going on provincially between the federal and the provincial governments. And so what happened in Manitoba was that they said, all right, Minister Miller said, if you are in that expression of interest pool in Manitoba, because we know there's a whole bunch of people who are postgrad work permit holders whose work is going to expire within 2024, whose work permit's going to expire, then they are going to have this temporary measure to authorize 6,700 of them who have been identified by the Manitoba PNP to be able to continue to work while they wait in the EOI pool under the PNP. So what they're hoping for, and we don't know exactly, I'm assuming it'll be an open work permit, temporary public policy of some sort. We don't know the length of that work permit, but they're saying within 2 years, they're hoping that Manitoba can clear the backlog. So we're pushing this problem further out, but at least it's giving a stopgap solution to people who generally have employers within the province, and the Manitoba government is saying we want these people to stay because it's important for our labor market needs.
Now, one of the key statements in here, and I'm gonna pull this up and highlight it. The minister says, let's invite him to join us. I always love it when the minister comes to join us here. So we'll bring Minister Miller in. These are his comments, and we'll see if I can actually get him down where he's a little bit more manageable here. There we go. So Minister Miller, he says, while this measure applies to Manitoba, they're open to exploring options with other provinces and territories to transition a greater portion of current temporary residents to permanent residents and address their labor market needs. And so this ongoing collaboration with other provinces, I guess the question I have for you, Alicia, is given the fact, yes, great, this Manitoba, this is what they're experiencing. And yeah, if you've got a bunch of people that are, protesting on at the steps of the legislature in Winnipeg, well, sure, that's going to get notice. And then, as we're very, very familiar, the court of public opinion, especially in media, is really, it drives immigration policy and the decisions they make. And so Manitoba, I'm sorry, is not the only province that is experiencing this. And you'll recall just recently, and I'll just pull up the Alberta Advantage immigration program here, our premier was complaining to our prime minister that they weren't increasing our allocation, which is, I think, right now at about 9,750. They said, look, all of these quet visa holders that we have in Alberta, and I'm not sure what the final figure is, but it's probably around 30 or 40,000 maybe. What's going to happen with them? The Alberta Opportunity Stream was the one stream where there was going to be a possibility for them to become PR. Well, based on our allocations from last year, and this is as of kind of the 2023 summary here, you can see just about 5,000 went through the Alberta Opportunity Stream. And this is really the only meaningful pathway, unless they're in these rural renewal streams, for these quet visa holders to be able to find PR. And we're not even talking about the postgrad work permit holders or other foreign workers in Alberta. So the number of, allocations are quite limited. We do have room, and, in through the various express entry streams, which are very similar to Manitoba in terms of notification. You express an interest in immigrating, and then they will invite you. In fact, it just recently, Alicia, I submitted one, I think Wednesday of last week, for the accelerated tech, a notification of interest, and we got an invitation 2 days later. So with 2,000, almost 20% of the allocations were geared towards the accelerated tech pathway. So we know this one is still alive. We know that it's still a very high priority. But many individuals have to realize that if there's only this many spaces, and then let's just slide down a little bit further and look at why they closed it. Well, as of and I think what was the last date? I think it was February. If we go down here, you can see as of October of last year, they had 4,146 in the queue for the Alberta Opportunity Stream. So you can see in 7-month processing times. So this is what we're faced with. And what we're seeing across the board with provinces is they only have a limited number of spaces. And if that's the case, and you have an overwhelming number of temporary residents looking to access one of those spaces, unless they suspend the program like Alberta did in February, our Alberta Opportunity Stream, or make changes to the intake process to remove certain candidates from even eligibility, basically narrowing that opening funnel for how many, who can come in. Well, there's only two things that can happen. Well, one, what they're doing, suspending programs, or two, the processing times just go off the charts. And so I think, Alicia, you'd mentioned over a year processing for some of these applications right now. Well,
Yeah.
if you do the numbers, even for Alberta, it's like they have to make changes. And I think for many of the programs, because there is not enough space, we're going to see some pretty significant tightening of eligibility for these programs. They're not going to be nearly as open. And we're going to see a lot more provinces doing exactly what Manitoba did in negotiating for work permit extensions for people that are sitting in the queue waiting to be processed. Because ultimately, when work permits for Alberta purposes, when they expire, Alberta doesn't recognize maintained status. And so individuals who may not have their application processed yet, may not have their nomination yet, can fall out of status and then ultimately have no options. So what are your thoughts on all of this, Alicia?
Yeah, so I think it's important for people to remember that provinces' hands are tied with respect to work permits. So they are only able to issue that Regulation 204 sub C provincial support letter to support a work permit after the nomination has come through. So prior to the nomination, when they have large numbers of people sitting in their expression of interest pools, there's no legislative regulatory provision right now in the Immigration Refugee Protection Regulations to allow the province to help. So that's why it's so important that Minister Miller and this whole deal with Manitoba hopefully becomes something that is implemented in the provinces that are really facing this labor crunch, where other provinces now can come up with a temporary solution for people who are in the pool that they believe fit their criteria. Most of the time, I think almost all of the time, it's going to be tied to an offer of employment or existing employment with an employer that is based in that province. And do be really careful, because a lot of the PNPs need employers to go and register or be approved, sometimes by the municipality. Like, for example, in the rural renewal stream, I'm helping an employer right now. They have to make sure that they have already been vetted as an employer, accepted by that municipality before they can get an endorsement letter. Some of the provinces across the board, the employer has to be approved and vetted ahead of time. And so it's really important that you're only working with reputable employers. If you're dealing with any sort of recruiter, those recruiters have to be provincially licensed as well. So if you are looking at starting to apply for PNPs because you want to get in the pool and you think this is the only way, make sure that you are doing it properly. Make sure that those recruiters never charge you a penny. Right? Those recruiters are paid by the Canadian employer to try to find you, and they have to be provincially licensed, and the employer should not be charging you a penny for a job offer. right? They are giving you a job. That's what they are paying you to do once you get hired, but they're never ever charging you thousands of dollars in order to give you a job offer. So be careful about that.
And I want to reiterate, and I've talked a lot about this in the past, the only way that whole job offer for sale um, corrupt system is ever tackled is by people not accepting it. And when you see a situation where an employer is in that racket, that you report them. And unless people are willing to come forward, things are not going to change. Alicia, let's shift and talk about some of the challenges and considerations now, because ultimately we know the world that we're in. We know that as individuals, the competition for these PNP nominations becomes more and more fierce. There's some long-term implications of this for the individuals that are here, for Canada generally. And when we look at kind of the social and economic impacts of these long waits for permanent residency, it's not helping anyone. And one thing we talked about, and you had said in earlier, that they are looking at more CEC draws, and that's all fine, but we're still bound by the annual levels plans. And unless something changes, and we haven't seen anything in the 2025 or 2026 projections to suggest they're going to drastically increase, well, how do you see this playing out, Alicia, for people that are here and for Canada generally?
Yeah, and so I've been having to have hard conversations with people who are booking consultations because some of them came and they had their postgrad work permit, but they were not able to actually get that high skilled Canadian work recently, right? Some of those people now were coming during COVID. They had a difficult time trying to find a job during the pandemic. They got their 1 year, but maybe they got their 1 year in 2021. And what's happening now is that people don't realize that their foreign low skilled work or their Canadian low skilled work is not going to qualify them for permanent residence in general for express entry, and very few PNPs will allow low skilled work. And so if if you look at that 3 year window on CEC on your Canadian experience class, always keep in mind that they assess you from your date of application, from your EAPR. And so you've got to look backwards in time to make sure you still have 1 year of qualifying high skilled Canadian work experience within the last 3 years. So people should be really strategic about what they are doing in terms of their program of study, making sure that's transitioning right away once they've applied for their PGWP to high skilled Canadian work, making sure that they are doing the things that can give them additional points, like language training, like learning French, but also hopefully people are already applying when they come to Canada with 1 year of foreign work experience. Because you and I have been talking about this a lot, Mark, with people who just came directly from high school, came to Canada, did some sort of 2 year post secondary degree or diploma, but not a full bachelor's degree. And they don't have a year of foreign work experience. And that's really hurting them in terms of points. And so becoming really strategic and looking at the long term plan, and also if you do have that 1 year of high skilled federal skilled worker eligible continuous in one knock as your primary occupation before you come to Canada, if you're able to start working for 6 months in, or 6 months equivalent, in one of the category specific occupations, this is the way, if you do it properly, that you have a much better chance. But you've got to be super careful because, of course, we know that those study permit temporary public policy measures have been finalized. They are no longer in effect, and people are capped at 20 hours a week. So it's going to take students longer and longer to build up any sort of eligible experience, not for CEC, but if they already qualify for FSW, to start getting category specific part-time work experience that will add up to 6 months. So these are pretty sophisticated techniques that people are going to have to time things and be very careful about making sure they stay within legal parameters.
Yes. Yes, people absolutely are going to be looking for whatever means they can to try to stay. And we get a lot of questions. Well, what do I do? Like, what does the future hold for me? And even people who are looking to come are saying, well, is it worth me coming? Is there, like, strategically, how should I position myself so I have a greater opportunity to stay? And in October and January, I remember doing a couple presentations on the golden age of Francophone immigration. And absolutely it is from a federal standpoint. It absolutely is. But there is a significant rise in rural immigration. And this was one of the messages that I gave at the Seeds of Change conference in Brooks, Alberta last week. It was actually on the Wednesday before our national conference. After everything that transpired on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, when I was here, I was actually grateful this time that I did take a pass on the national conference, because there was a whole bunch of things that came up. But at that conference, it was specifically targeted to rural immigration. And as we discussed here, and let's see if I can go over to our screen here, you can see the rural renewal stream is one of the options for individuals in Canada. And this list of 875 certificates issued, well, guess how many they have in the queue for the rural renewal stream as of May 7th, essentially. Actually, they said May 3rd. Guess how many, Alicia? Just take a stab in the dark. How many RS, applications have been submitted for this program?
1,500.
Oh, that's pretty close, pretty close. 808. So, and the reason that's significant is because we're May. Like, we still have the whole rest of the year. And many of the communities that are designated are just kind of coming on board with the programs. You and I met with probably 80% of them earlier this year, giving them tips and strategies on how to make sure their programs are, at least protected from abuse, and ensuring that they're doing what the communities want them to do. But when I spoke with the two head officials who ran the rural renewal stream, I asked them the question that was in everyone's mind. I said, when are you going to suspend this program? If you only have so many places, and once again, you can see here, as far as the nominations, the totals, if you go down here to the bottom, you can see they issued 10,029. They had a little bit of a bump up that they got from the feds, but essentially around 10,000 nominations. And you have allocated certain numbers to certain pathways. And if you've already pretty much met your quota from last year, surely you're going to have to suspend it. But Alicia, they didn't say that. They didn't say that the program was going to be suspended. And I said, well, by the end of the year, you're going to have about 4,000. So are you ready for that? And what that showed me is that Alberta, just like many of the other provinces, are in a situation where they're creating programs to encourage people to live outside of the major centers. And the rural renewal stream is just one example of that. But we've already had confirmations from Minister Fraser and now Minister Miller regarding the importance of not living in the major centers. And so if you're looking for pathways, you're trying to figure out what options, where should I study? What program should I take? If I come to Canada, where should I live? I would strongly encourage you to look to smaller centers. Now, I'm not talking about moving to Brooks, Alberta. There's no post-secondary facility or educational center there. But what I am meaning is maybe you consider Grand Prairie. Maybe you consider Lethbridge, Alberta, where I live, which are both communities of, roughly, 100,000 people, but they are eligible under the rural renewal stream. And those pathways affords a third option in addition to the Alberta Opportunity Stream in Alberta, or any of the programs, really, if you look across the country. The more pathways you can create for yourself, the greater the likelihood. And Alicia, in almost every one of these PNP programs, the provinces have extra points or bonus points for people who live outside of those communities. So sometimes that's the game changer when you have a points-based system where you're competing against other people. If you're living and working in Fort St. John, BC, you're going to have a greater shot than if you're in the greater Vancouver area. And so I'm sure that was discussed at the conference, right? And so this is the direction that people have to consider, is rural really at this stage of everything is better.
And that's just what I was going to bring up, Mark, is when we look at BC, for example, exactly like you said, the points for the BC PNP program. So keep in mind that BC has provincial points that you have to meet in addition to, if you're looking at express entry, you've got to meet minimum eligibility for that. But for the BC PNP points, those have been creeping upwards. They used to be, 60 to 90 maybe, and now they're at 120 to 130. And the reason those points are so high is that there are so many more people. The allocations have not increased. So BC has not received overall more provincial allocations. It's probably only around 8,000 nomination spots for the year. And people get more points if they are outside of the greater Vancouver area. And so that is going to make a significant difference in their provincial BC PNP score. And the other thing that is important to keep in mind is while you are looking at those scores, there are future changes coming, BC's already said, for language. So language requirements are going to go higher and higher across the board. Make sure that you're doing your CELPIP, your Pearson, your IELTS tests, and you're getting as high of a CLB ranking as you possibly can, because we know that for students, those CLB rankings are going to go upwards to an 8 across the board, which is, higher than express entry is requiring.
Absolutely. So, folks, this is the world we're in right now. And we do not see at this stage, just to summarize things, the federal government massively increasing their annual permanent resident levels plans. We just don't see that. We don't know what the impact of a change in government will be. We don't know if there's going to be more allocations and the federal government is going to pull away some of theirs under the federal high skill programs, and reallocate more spaces to the provinces. We just don't know. I have my own views on this, Alicia, and I really think when it comes to economic immigration that it makes sense to give the provinces more control if over the economic PR programs. They know where the labor shortages are. They're much more able to track and be attuned to what's happening in their own provinces. And they're all pretty sophisticated now. They get it. They're not newbies to this game. And I think initially the federal government really wanted to take a kind of a measured approach at issuing allocations. And we've seen increases in numbers and a divestiture of many of those permanent resident spots to PNPs over the last number of years. But I think it only makes sense to continue down that path. The provinces know economically what they need, and I think they're in a better position than the federal government. So if I had my wish, I would direct more of those economic PRs to the PNPs, have IRCC deal with the humanitarian and family-based applications, which they're so good at. And in my mind, that would be a better solution. But in the world we have right now, there are many, many of our listeners here to the podcast, many of our other immigration lawyers and consultants who listen, that are going to have a lot more difficult conversations with their clients. And there is no way that everyone you represent, or you, if you are a foreign worker, there's no way all of you are going to have a pathway to permanent residence. And with this new measure that the federal government has announced, I understand what they're doing. Like, I do. And if they feel genuinely that these candidates are truly the best, well, then it's going to have to pull from other things like general draws if they're going to create space and room for these individuals to be able to become permanent residents. And if they choose to continue forward with CEC draws, and we don't know exactly if they're going to just twiddle their thumbs for a while here and let all of these, the surplus of foreign workers whose permits are expiring, just encourage them to go home and then start doing CECs. We just don't know. There's a lot of speculation, but it's definitely a lot of uncertain times. And I would encourage people who are in this situation to book consultations with us. Alicia, you and I, we've seen it all. We've had a very, very good opportunity to be involved in many levels of strategy for people to try to stay. And we'd encourage individuals to seek, legal assistance in developing strategies now. Don't wait to the last minute. That's usually when people contact us.
And one thing I want to end on too, Mark, is if you did get your nomination, if you got your application approved and you're coming to do your landing, and we know that for PNPs, you must intend to actually reside in the province that has nominated you, and retention is a really important thing. It is something that the provinces track very carefully. And if you let's say we're nominated for Saskatchewan and you decide you're going to come fly into Toronto, and you've got your rental set up in Toronto, and you come to the CBSA officer, the IRCC officer at the port of entry, and you say, oh yeah, here's my confirmation of permanent residence documents, and I'm coming to land in Ontario. And they say, well, wait a minute, you got your nomination from Saskatchewan. Know that those officers have the ability to not land you, to refuse to land you if you are trying to enter through a different port of entry to a different province where you've not been nominated, and you cannot prove to them that you have a valid intent to reside in the province that nominated you. So don't think you're scot-free. Integrity of the system is very important. It's going to mess it up for other people if you're playing fast and loose and not doing what you said you were going to do. So make sure that if you have accepted a nomination and you put your evidence forward of intent to live in that province, you do actually go live there.
Exactly. Great, great piece of advice to end on. All right. Well, thanks so much, Alicia, for joining today. I also want to give a shout out to our Canadian Immigration Institute itself, who is the sponsor of this podcast. And I want to highlight as well the Express Entry Accelerator, the brand new 2024 version, all new, all created. And if the government decides to make further changes or, modify things, well, I guess I'll be making some new lessons and some new videos. But there's over 60 individual lessons that walk you through the whole Express Entry process. And there's a masterclass every bi-weekly on Wednesdays from 4 to 6 p.m. Mountain Time. I'm waiting for the subscribers to the course. Any questions you have, I'm there to answer them for you. And that's every 2 weeks, and that's for life, as long as you want to be involved. And if the government does something crazy and institutes a whole new structure for Express Entry, a whole new intake process, well, then I guess I know what I'll be doing for the next few days, re-recording all those videos. And anyone who subscribes to the course at any time gets access to the entire course in the future, all new updates. So if you're an immigration consultant or an immigration lawyer, you'd be stupid not to subscribe. All right. Thanks so much, Alicia, once again for joining and being here and offering all this great insight and sharing intel from the National CBA Conference in Montreal. And I guess I'll see you in a couple minutes as we slide over to our weekly live Q&A on the YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed, please do get notified when we go live. Last week I did it on Thursday because I was speaking at the conference on Wednesday. So, all right, guys, take care, and we will see all of you guys next time. Take care.